June 6, 1944. The English Channel heaves under a forest of ships. Ramps drop, water turns to shrapnel. On the bluffs above Omaha, a German machine gunner watches figures wade through surf and smoke. He writes later, "They keep coming. Not like soldiers, like a force of nature." Near Caen, another German officer stares as British tanks advance in a crawl. 200 meters, halt, fire, then again. Every movement is precise, mechanical, and terrifying. Two enemies, two styles of war. One question for those who fought both. Who was more frightening? The American storm of steel or the British, cold and methodical? This is the war as German survivors described it, drawn from diaries, after-action reports, and interrogations. Germans had a word for the American way. Materialschlacht, the battle of materials. If a hill would not fall, they buried it in shells. If a river would not yield, they bridged it under fire. A panzer commander after Kasserine. They lack our tactical tradition, but when their forward observer calls, the shells arrive before we can move. Speed mattered, and American artillery moved like lightning. Radios crackled, batteries shifted and spoke again. German aces mocked American fighters until they counted them. Their planes are inferior, one wrote, but there are so many. Quantity had its own quality. Crowded skies, valleys full of trucks, tank lines that did not end. To a German platoon in a hedgerow, the storm felt like this. The whistle of incoming, the ground lifting, tree bursts shredding leaves into rain, and then, through the haze, more men, more tanks, more bulldozers. You could destroy an American unit. You could not make the Americans stop. On Omaha, the storm became human. MG-42 barrels glowed. Sand leapt like boiling water. The first waves were cut apart, and still the next waves came. A German gunner later called them machines, who walked through their dead as if ghosts. Letters home read like fragments from a nightmare. We fired until our belts were empty. We changed positions, and they were already there. The sea brought more boats. The Americans improvised behind the surf line, dragging obstacles with dozers, wiring Bangalore torpedoes through coils of steel, taking cover behind the dead because there was nothing else. When German ammunition faltered, the balance tipped. Rangers clawed up the bluffs. Engineers blew lanes. A captain with a map turned a slaughter into a foothold that became a flood. The American style was on display. Violent, direct, relentlessly supplied. If the Americans were a storm, the British were a wall that learned to move. Germans wrote about Tommies who dug in like miners and refused to yield. Even when pushed out of a village, they turned rubble into cover and kept shooting. They cling to the ground, one field marshal wrote, as if it belongs to them by oath. A Panzer Lehr report describes tanks advancing exactly 200 meters, halting to bombard, then edging forward with infantry tight to their armor. Not rash, deliberate. Chess against a patient machine. Where Americans might solve a problem with naval guns, the British and Canadians often solved it with men in rooms. A German private in Caen noted, "Canadians clear house by house." The rhythm was brutal. Breach, grenade, burst, move, again and again, until a block was taken by occupying every breath of it. British commandos added a colder edge. Trained for knife-range fighting, they appeared where patrols should not reach, especially at night. Reports from Holland complain of phantom patrols testing wire and snatching sentries. Picture a ruined village at dusk. Americans mass for morning. Dozers carve lanes. Radios argue artillery grids.
Right, cover that window.
Shells stack like firewood. British troops, mud to their knees, are already inside the first houses, turning doors into choke points, rigging fields of fire, passing tea down a line that smells of cordite and rain. A German sergeant briefs his men. If Americans attack, the hedgerow will vanish under smoke, and watch the flanks. They love to push a gap with tanks. If British attack, the line will feel like it is freezing. Every orchard a trench, every garden a kill zone. The Americans will break you, he says. The British will wear you down. The most dreaded sound on a German radio was a calm American voice giving map coordinates. Fire for effect. The reply came too fast. German batteries, short on tubes and fuel, preferred planned fires. Americans practiced the opposite. Responsive barrages smashed anything that raised its head. Infantry lived under that umbrella. A squad pinned by a machine gun called it in. A platoon flanked under a rolling barrage that moved by metronome. Tanks advanced with a curtain of dirt and thunder walking in front of them. By the time a counterattack formed, the grid was already red, and the counterattack dissolved under steel. Radios, logistics, doctrine, training, parts of a single weapon system. German veterans spoke of trucks with envy and despair. American trucks, endless, identical, dependable, ate distance and spit out ammunition. While we counted bullets, one staff officer wrote, they threw away half-used boxes. Exaggeration maybe, but it captures the feeling. Mechanics, drivers, and quartermasters grinding forward behind every bayonet. The difference wasn't just quantity, it was reliability. Jeeps rattled and kept going. Fuel arrived when needed. Field kitchens steamed in the rain. A division that fought today could fight tomorrow because someone far behind had done the math. Asked after the war why they lost, a German general didn't name a tactic. He said, your trucks never broke down. The wall of supply never cracked, and the storm never ran out of sky. If logistics were America's secret, temperament was Britain's. Germans were fascinated and sometimes unnerved by rituals that refused to die in the mud. Medics wrote about men asking for tea while their wounds were dressed. Officers advanced in neckties on days when death felt formal. Sappers fixed bridges under mortar fire and then queued for rations as if time itself wore a watch. To attackers, this looked like stubbornness made flesh. To defenders, it felt like inevitability. These men will not break, so the line must. Even when British operations moved slowly, and they often did, the pressure did not ease. Villages turned into grinders. At Caen, a German officer noted, they are thorough. British caution was not cowardice. It was a calculus. Pay today in time, save tomorrow in blood. Patience, multiplied across brigades and weeks, became its own kind of terror. The clock favored the army that could afford to wait. What enemies fight for matters. German interrogators, indoctrinated with slogans, struggled to categorize American prisoners. Many did not hate. They were determined to finish the job and go home. One asked for a cola and baseball scores. Another worried about his paybook more than propaganda. The absence of ideology was confusing and powerful. British prisoners were different. Their humor cut like wire. A U-boat log records captured sailors insisting on tea time. A medic remembered Tommies joking with missing boots and missing blood. This was not bravado. It was tradition worn as armor. Asked decades later who frightened him more, a veteran said, the Americans had the machines. The British had the soul. Two halves of an answer that together became defeat. German reports noticed a contrast in how problems were solved. American junior leaders improvised. Bridges from doors, stretchers from doors, radios powered by borrowed batteries from wrecks. A lieutenant could reroute a column, call down guns, and requisition a bulldozer without waiting for a ceremony of signatures. Battlefield friction met a culture that rewarded fix it now. British units fought differently, but no less effectively. Their strength was drill. Procedures repeated until muscle memory survived fear. A section attack unfolded like a practice sentence. Base of fire, maneuver, assault, consolidate, reorganize. When things went wrong, and they always did, the steps provided a ladder back to order. It looked slow to outsiders. It felt inevitable to those on the receiving end. To German eyes, both styles were dangerous for opposite reasons. The Americans changed the situation faster than you could understand it. The British refused to let the situation. Darkness changed the balance. British night patrols, small, quiet, mercilessly curious, slipped through wire and found the seams of a position. A sentry disappeared, a flare went up, the line felt thinner. Reports called them phantoms. Americans owned the night in a different way, by turning it to day. Star shells climbed and burst, searchlights bounced off low clouds. Artillery marked the map with timed fire. The night became another shift in a factory that never closed. For soldiers trying to sleep in shell scrapes, both enemies taught the same lesson. You are not safe because the clock says you should be. To Germans around Caen and in the Scheldt, Canadians were unmistakable. They moved like British infantry, but hit with an anger sharpened by months of hard fighting. House to house, barn to barn, field to field, they preferred the intimacy of combat. A German private wrote, half accusing and half admiring, "They clear rooms like carpenters, measure, cut, finish." This forced the defense onto human terms. Artillery could miss by a street. A Canadian with a Sten in a doorway could not be dodged. He had already chosen the room you would die in. The lesson for German commanders was grim. When Canadians anchored a front, expect to lose ground one wall at a time and not get it back. Sometimes German armor gathered and lunged. Sometimes it worked for an hour. Too often, the rhythm was the same. Scouts spotted movement, a forward observer read a grid, and the road ahead blossomed into black volcanoes. Tanks angled into fields, and detonated mines laid that morning by engineers who seemed to live underground. Infantry on the flanks heard the dull hammer of American .50 caliber and the steel saw chatter of British Vickers. The counterattack went from arrow to ash. Prisoners spoke with tired awe about enemies who rebuilt a battlefield faster than it could be destroyed. Fighting an army is hard. Fighting an army plus a construction company is worse. Culture leaked into everything. Americans named their tanks, painted pin-ups, and wrote home about girls and steaks. British letters were tighter, drier, stubbornly polite. Weather poor, advanced one hedge. Both styles concealed fear the same way a shield conceals a man's belly. German troops drilled to stand under speeches found the American lack of theater baffling and refreshing. Here was an army that turned up the volume of war instead of the volume of words. The British seemed to have made a pact with misery. They would not complain if it would not either. Trying to explain the difference, veterans reached for metaphors. The Americans were a factory. The British were a cathedral. One produced thunder, the other echo. Together they produced surrender. As summer bled into autumn, the pattern hardened. American breakthroughs tore open the map. British and Canadian advances pinned and crushed. Ports were taken. Bridges were thrown. Airfields multiplied. Supply dumps bloomed like small cities in orchards and fields. The German army, still dangerous, found itself bleeding in places it could not stitch. Fuel ran out at the wrong hour. Replacements arrived with boots that did not fit. Orders grew shorter. A colonel wrote, "They are not better than us at everything. They are just good enough at everything, all at once." Good enough, multiplied by millions, was enough. After the war, interviewers asked, who was harder to fight? Answers were rarely simple. Many said the Americans because of artillery that arrived like a verdict and the machines that would not die. Others said the British because a position taken from them was a position you paid to keep. One lieutenant wrote, "The British fought with tradition, the Americans fought with the future." Another added, "The future brings a lot of ammunition." Neither army won alone. They were different blades on the same shears. In the end, the stories do not resolve into a scorecard. They resolve into a feeling, dread, respect, and relief at having survived either enemy at all. If you stood on the bluffs at Omaha, you remember the Americans as an answer that kept being shouted until the question broke. If you fought south of Caen, you remember the British as a grip that tightened until movement became impossible. Two armies, one victory, the storm and the wall. When the last notebooks closed and the last interrogations were filed, a single line remained.
The Americans had the machines, rows of Sherman tanks, trucks, and artillery moving forward across Europe.
Dead to end a continent-wide catastrophe. When the noise faded, this is what the men who faced them wrote. The future arrived in steel, the past in discipline, and Germany, caught between the two, ran out of both. Like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more history uncovered.